SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
As the curtain closes on a summer of sports, with the European Championships having taken place in Germany and the Olympics in Paris, iGaming Daily will be looking at some of the trends we've witnessed this past summer in the latest episode of our CRM-focused series. And joining myself, James Ross, to discuss all of this is Jonathan Collins, the Strategic Services Team Leader at Optimove. Welcome, Jonathan. How have you been, and how was your summer of sport?
Well, hello, James, and thanks for having me back. The summer of sport has been wonderful, as I'm sure you'll agree. Just so many great events happening and so many high points. Exciting.
Yeah, I will echo that. The summer has been non-stop sport. I normally dread the summer period after the Premier League has finished, or it concludes, because I'm just so indulged in it every week. I'm following it. I'm following every game. I've got my fantasy football app open. I'm looking who's performing well, who's not performing well, trying to find that competitive edge to get up the leaderboard. And I just narrowly missed out on the title this year, but I'm coming back with an FPL vengeance. But this summer's been, I won't say completely different, because there's obviously been sports previously, with the Qatar World Cup kind of altering the footballing schedule, at least anyway. But this summer's just been on another level. It's been sport, and it's been beautiful to watch. And the good thing is the Premier League starts in the next 5 days, so it continues. But before we kind of move into the topic, I do want to ask, big summer of sport, what's been your standout moment or performance this summer?
Yeah, so I think it's quite hard to pin down one, isn't it? I think, I've been a huge fan of the Olympics. Obviously, it's just concluded yesterday. But I think for a specific moment, it's probably the England winner, the England one that took its extra time against Slovakia. I was in a pub with some friends, and it looked like we were going out. Everyone was quite down in the dumps.
Like Jude's overhead kick.
It was, yeah. And
yeah.
That was, as a single moment, it's quite hard to beat moments.
Yeah, I'll have to echo that point. I think Jude Bellingham's overhead kick was spectacular, given the fact in that tournament we were, I'd say the word woeful leading up to that moment. I'm probably following that moment, to be honest. It wasn't a great performance, and the fact we made it to the final was something else. But also, I'll give Cole Palmer a shout out, because he's done the thing that every England team does for us. He gives us that slimmer of hope just to get us knocked down again.
Exactly. There's something very special about, especially England's performance this summer. We managed to win all the games where we didn't look like we deserve it, and then just about lose the one that we maybe played best in.
Yeah, but give credit to that young Spanish team. They were excellent throughout the whole tournament.
Deserved winners, yes.
Yeah, and I was a win-win situation, because I had them in the office sweepstakes. So
it's not rigged at all. Not rigged.
I wasn't complaining. Perfect. So before the Euros got underway, Jonathan, you joined Insider Sports editor Ted Clay on this podcast, and both of you dissected what sportsbooks can do to kind of cater to a very large and diverse customer base. Just before we go into the final points of that detail, post the events of the Euros, can you just summarize and reflect on what you expected pre-summer and actually what you've witnessed post-events?
Yeah, absolutely. So we make a number of predictions in the run-up to the tournament, and I'm happy to say most of them came true. We saw a large uptick in new players as expected, a huge uptick in returning players, which is also very good. So a nice, large, enlarged pie for us to play with and attract as far as users go. We saw, for the most part, a significant increase in games where the national team was present, although there was a slight anomaly. One thing that we didn't expect was specifically around the finals. A number of the key teams of the favourites had been knocked out by this point. But we did see the finals being the biggest day in terms of the number of bettors, really across Europe, especially in Southern Europe and in large parts of Eastern Europe as well, and not just in England and Spain. So that one was very interesting. And then, post-tournament, we were expecting to see, a very abrupt slump in retention rates. And we have seen that definitely with, it's a sort of standout figure in the UK. We saw a retention rate half immediately after the final whistle, so to speak. So, there is exactly what we were expecting to see. And, it's always nice to have that sort of validation when you make these predictions or podcast pre.
Yeah, and I'll make sure I get a sound snippet for you and overlay it so you can confirm that you made that point.
Thanks.
But it is always interesting, and people normally think with, say, the Olympics just off the back of the Euros that you're going to expect more of an uptick. But, I mean, the reality is the Olympics is very hard to kind of judge in terms of who to bet on, because there's not a lot of data to go previous event unless you're looking at the 4 years ago. And there's so much that happened in between that it's just a hard one to call and a hard one to definitely bet on.
Definitely. I think when it comes to the Olympics, I do hear this a lot about people thinking, oh, maybe we should pivot to the Olympics. And I don't think it's actually a very good thing for the operators to turn to, because it's only a couple of weeks long for one thing. I mean, the Euros is literally twice as long. But then you've also got the resumption of domestic football not long in the future. But there's something about the Olympics as well. Although it's the premier event for a lot of the sports that are present, it's not really the case for a lot of the ones that we bet on. I think maybe basketball and golf are the only two that sort of actually attract top, tennis as well, obviously, attract the top, stars in their sports that, there's also a major competition elsewhere that people also bet on. For the most part, sprinting, swimming, these are very sort of romantic events that happen in the Olympics themselves. And people just don't.
Yeah, you'll probably also have to factor in a bit of burnout or fatigue, because, like you said, you've got the Euros, you had the Copa America at the same time as well, and then to have the Olympics and then going straight onto the back or straight onto a domestic football. EFL's already started last weekend. You got the Premier League next weekend, so there's also that to factor in. But before we kind of jump into the topics, I've kind of diverted us away a little bit. Your data that you received from the European Championships. Quickly, John, where has this information been sourced from?
Yeah, absolutely. So Optimove, we maintain a benchmarking database called Pulse, which is available to all of our clients. In there, you'll be able to find market data aggregated across all of our clients, broken out by country, by operator, by vertical in some cases. And in there, you're going to be able to find a huge range of insights around a number of different metrics and KPIs that you'll be able to use for developing and enhancing your marketing strategy.
Perfect. I'll leave any of the links in the description below to Pulse and anything Optimove related as well. But onto the topic at hand, because I like I said, I diverted as well. I've taken up quite a big chunk of our start of this session. So, data received from the Euros. John, how can firms capitalize on kind of the unique interest during the finals where, the user engagement was the highest to sustain user activity beyond major tournaments? And we already said we've seen kind of like a drop in them, but, how can we capitalize on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to reiterate, I mean, the fact that the finals was such a big day across Europe, and not just Spain and England who are actually playing, is really, really important, I think, this time around. So it bucks the trend of those users having an extreme proclivity for their own national team. And I think there are a few things that you can go around doing here. So the first one, obviously, is the development of a local marketing plan. So this means that you need to make sure you have a accurate and you can use your user information to a certain degree as well as betting behaviors to derive this, but really to develop a calendar of the key events that are upcoming. So as you already mentioned, the sort of resumption of domestic football is probably the key one for a lot of the cases when you're talking about continuing things from the Euros. So that's number one. This is obviously going to be more effective in countries where you've got early league restarts, like the UK. If you're talking about maybe Bundesliga with a few more weeks, you might need to pivot to a slightly different strategy. The other angle here is proper segmentation and personalization. So, for non-new players, we should have a pretty good picture now of player activity, understanding of their interest. We can start to isolate those players who only really come out for the big events, let them churn organically rather than throwing, good money after them. And focus retention efforts on the users who are more likely to remain and focus on increasing ARPU. You can approach these guys in a lot of different ways. I'd probably start by recommending you really go after personalization at this point. So highly personalized content, product recommendations, educational content, that sort of thing, I think is really the way to go here in order to try and make sure that we are capitalizing on the interest from the finals, especially if you can tie it back to sort of per player bets, things like that. People bet on the Golden Boot. If anyone's bet on, specific players or made a lot of player bets, you can tie that back to domestic football as well, where they play, they're all playing every week. So it's a very good way of playing.
Perfect. And kind of let's look at gamification specifically in this point. Like, how can gamification techniques be enhanced to or modified to kind of encourage continued engagement after a national team's exits the tournament?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Something I think is really important when making plans for these big tournaments. So yeah, as we said before, I think players are up to 40% more likely to bet on their own national team. This team was slightly different, as I've already mentioned, as we saw some swells of engagement after some of the favorites were knocked out. And it's going to depend a little bit on when the team actually does exit the tournament as well. So semi-final loss might be irrecoverable, but if you're getting knocked out in the group stages, you've got a decent window there. So I think the rule of thumb I like to use when it comes to gamification is to tie the redemption of any offers as late in the campaign as it's possible to do so. So to give you a couple of examples of this, you can offer a free bet on the final if you place a bet on each preceding knockout round. One quite favorite one I like. You're going to be able to build interest in the teams who are playing, even though if the national team is not there. But you also get a kind of interest in those teams because you're going to be wanting to make that bet as accurately as possible. So you need to pay attention to who's winning. As another one, a free bet on the Golden Boot, or the highest score in the tournament, is actually a really good one that I've come across here, because not only do you still have that vested interest in normally key strikers for the remaining teams there, most of whom you'll probably know from European football anyway, but you've also kind of left a nice, easy marketable bet on the winner of the final. So that interest will kind of spill over naturally into additional, which is exactly what we're trying.
Perfect. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, who was the Golden Boot winner?
I think it was shared between a few guys, wasn't it, this year? I mean,
that's what I was thinking. Because at one point, I can't remember who it was, but yeah, I did think it was split between four because I can't remember the players. It's been that long. I'll find that out before the end of the podcast, just so I don't leave us on a knife edge there. But let's kind of look at the kind of mobile and live betting trends. What factors do you think might have contributed to the lower live betting figures during the tournament, especially like you mentioned in the UK and Ireland? And how can we address this moving forward for the industry to improve future live betting engagement at either other tournaments or during kind of more consolidated events?
Yeah, this is a fascinating phenomenon, I think, and one that we haven't really observed at scale before. So yeah, we see pretty much all of the players right across Europe peaking in their level of mobile usage. So everyone's using to the tune of over 85%. We're expecting around 80 pre-tournament, so seeing this 85% and more and growing is really interesting. The live betting figures were significantly lower in most places, but definitely I think the absolute basement levels in England, where we saw around 40% on the days where the England team were not playing, and that dropped all the way down to around 30 when they. So this would kind of point to a couple of factors. The first one being that casual bettors in general seem to have a bit of a less of a preference for live betting in general. You probably would agree with that, but if you're placing a bet and you're only going to place one bet, you're probably just going to pick the winner, or you're going to pick the score or something like that nature. and just sort of check out of the app at that point. The second and maybe third things here is as I think you already mentioned, is actually fatigue. Long football season. Then we've got the Euros. People are a little bit burned out, I think. So it's quite hard to make that sell for a number of different bets at this point. Especially one where you continue to engage with the phone. I think probably we're looking at the case of, again, people just trying to pick a simple bet just to increase the level of excitement on the tournament. But I think as well, with England specifically, this is another case of probably just genuine interest, I would imagine. I think we're looking at England trying to win another major tournament for the first time in 60 years. Certainly the people I've spoken to about this, they just wanted to place their bet and watch. So I think it's an interesting phenomenon. I think, if England were to get knocked out in the World Cup at the group stages, I really hope they don't. But if that were to happen, I think we would see those live figures probably appreciate quite strong.
Yeah. I also think it's probably depending on who England now get as manager, because it's either between Pep Guardiola or Lee Carsley. I think you pick on that one.
Well, it's definitely an interesting phenomenon again that we could be seeing here. If England play a more attractive style of football, will we see more live engagement as well?
Mm-hmm.
Possibly. It's hard to say, right? I mean, the fact that they were so solid, relatively hard to break down, didn't do an awful lot going forward, probably disincentivizes people from placing, like in the score first, how many corners are you going to get, that kind of thing. So, I think that you might have built to something there if we get sort of a total football Pep Guardiola style game. You never know. That might definitely be a bit more appealing to a punter.
Yeah, I'm glad you also mentioned that we was quite a defensive team in England during the tournament, because I've just got up the Golden Boot winner like I promised, and there was a 6-way tie, and surprisingly, I don't remember him scoring this many, but Harry Kane, they all got 4. Harry Kane was in that list, along with Spain's Dani Olmo, who had a great tournament, to be fair. And then there was Jamal Musiala. I think he probably would have won that if Germany did get knocked out sooner than expected. Netherlands go to Cody Gakpo, and then Slovakia's Ivan Šranc, and I am so sorry, I'm going to try and pronounce his name. Georges Mikatadze from, I think he's in Napoli.
Sounds exactly like
I promised it, yes. I promised you, but I didn't promise I'd pronounce them all correctly. So, perfect. Moving forward, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. So let's look at kind of market-specific strategies, because some of this data was actually quite interesting, and I really like the data with, I believe it was Portugal. So how can firms kind of tailor their approach for different markets, kind of given the varying behaviours observed? You had kind of that higher retention rate in Portugal, while you kind of had the reverse trends in Romania.
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very interesting. As I said, anyone who sort of kicks or bucks the trend, I should say, when it comes to post-tournament retention rates is very interesting. Certainly, I think, Portugal and Romania, two very interesting ones. And I think, the main thing, I think we mentioned this already, the main thing that operators should be doing is just mapping out their local scene extensively to make sure that if there is something that's happening, and I still don't know what's happening in Romania, to be completely honest with you. But, if there is something of interest...
I like the honesty.
Well, we try, but sometimes, it's just a bit of a head-scratcher. And then there are a lot of factors that could go into this, right? It could be product, it could be, incentive-based marketing. There's lots of stuff that could go into it, not just be entirely based around events. But for the most part, as I said, the knowledge of a calendar and benchmarking data to really illuminate opportunities post tournament, I think is really going to be important here. So, a couple of examples here. If you didn't know anything, like for example, the Cheltenham Festival in March is the only time that operators will gain new horse racing customers in the UK. That's it's not necessarily something that everybody would know, But if you're in the local market, you'd probably what you expect to have that local knowledge and be able to pivot to that point when it happens. And likewise in the US, maybe the slightly better analogy here because, the Euros is finished. That's kind of the Super Bowl. Immediately afterwards, something's happened in this kind of the March madness, if you like. Very, big basketball tournament, massive cross-sport and retention opportunity. So that calendar is number one. The second one, I think, is we really need to be building adaptive segments for the market and feeding into that with advanced modeling. So, knowing who we can cross-sell to, who has a high propensity for what, who's at risk of churn. We can really build some very intelligent marketing plans around that. And that should help with the retention rates just naturally. In a perfect world, we should be able to get ourselves set up to the point we don't need to adapt all that much when a tournament's concluded. It's just a case of feeding in that event calendar and those events of interest. And really running all, one-off campaigns, event-based calendar, on top of a robust set of automated user journey. And that should definitely help with matters. Obviously, there are, more localized and specific things that you can do. But those are the key building blocks, I think, for making sure that we're not taking massive hits at the end of these sort of...
Mm-hmm. And just to round up the podcast, because again, I'm just looking at the time. And my producer, Renee, is messaging me like, come on. We're nearing the end now. So let's look at kind of future-proofing and also generosity adjustments, because the last CRM-focused episode that we did do, it was about balancing marketing generosity, and we did it with Optimove Shy Frank. And there was talk of a kind of knowing the limit, or what's too much for marketers and offering this generosity scale out, and there's plans to decrease this. How can companies maintain kind of their user satisfaction and loyalty without being overly reliant on the bonuses through the generosity marketing?
Yeah, it's a really topical, very, very important thing. I say a number of our clients, including our biggest clients, are discussing this right now. So it's a good question. And there's a few things. So just to confirm, like decreasing generosity spending should be a priority for a lot of creators as we move to post-tournament. Pre-tournament, we're looking to acquire a large piece of the sort of casual better pie because there's going to be a lot of new players. There's going to be a post-tournament. We're really looking to increase ARPU and retain those kind of like more valuable users, which means that we're probably looking to weed out users who are, say, abusing our bonus mechanisms, pivoting to alternative strategies for those who are maybe over-bonused, even if they are. The first step to doing this is to identify those users correctly. So we obviously maintain our own proprietary models to do this, but you can have alternative approaches as long as you know the right things to look for. Once you've got those users flagged in your data effectively, the second thing to do is to really prioritize how you want to go. So a VIP user, for example, who's at high risk of churn, you may want to sort of put the fact that they're kind of over bonus to one side, because at the end of the day they are worth more to you than the money that you're spending. But likewise, you've got a lower value user, that you don't need to pull the trigger on that generosity spending. Maybe you should go for an alternative approach. The next thing you should be doing, I think, is, I think we've mentioned this a couple of times now, is personalization and high quality non-bonus content. I think this is something sometimes operators tend to skip a little bit. And I know that there's certainly, you need product availability and enhancements to be able to, say, send out a personalized product recommendation to all your users. But there are things available that you can definitely play with around this one. And then, when it comes to non-bonus content, I think most operators definitely have some of this stuff already, but they don't always, send it effectively as a campaign. I think educational content's really good. I've definitely got one poker app. I think it just occasionally sends you what to do in this situation if you've got a certain pair of hands or whatever like that. And I think it's this is definitely engaging content that users can pivot to, or operators can pivot to get away from just only really interacting with their users when they're sending free spins or a free bet or a deposit and get kind of campaign out there. Because as much as anything else, you're kind of training users to expect that kind of generosity from you, instead of just saying like, hey, we've got great products, here's some information about it. We've got great knowledge, here's some information about that. And I think these are definitely things that the majority of operators could lean into a little bit.
Perfect. John, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. I think the key takeaway from this, because you've mentioned it a few times, is personalization. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of iGaming Daily. I've loved this conversation. I always say it to everyone who comes on, I wish it was more than 20 minutes, but because we can talk for hours and hours about it. But thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing the insight and data from Pulse, and any links relevant to this conversation for the listeners out there, I will leave in the description below. But apart from that, I've been James Ross, joined by Jonathan Collins, and this has been iGaming Daily. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network, or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.